What is up, and welcome to another edition of the Bruin Bible. Will Decker, your host. Make sure you guys are liking and subscribing the podcast. We are brought to you guys today by our advertisers. Our advertisers are Bell to Bell Fitness, Shea Tor, a realtor out in Arizona, former Bruin alum, and my main man Howard Chang, a realtor right here in Los Angeles. Let's go through them, guys. Bell to Bell Fitness is a boxing gym on the West Coast used by their FIT acronym, Fight Inspired Training. My main man, Tony Gonzalez, was the boxing coach for UCLA for over 10 years. He has built this gym on the West Side to learn how to boxing, stay in shape, and get you all the essentials you need to become somebody that is obsessed with boxing and fitness. Make sure to check it out. Go into Bell to Bell Fitness and say you heard about it from the Bruin Bible, and you're going to get a free session with Tony Gonzalez. So make sure to check that out. Shea Tor, my main man. Shea Tor is a licensed real estate agent in Arizona and a lifelong Bruin. He's a current Wooden Athletic Fund donor and football season ticket holder. When not selling houses or going to UCLA games, he loves to travel the country, checking out different arenas, ballparks, and stadiums. If you're looking to make the move to Arizona or know someone who is, please reach out to our loyal friend, Mr. Shea Tor. His phone number is 602-487-3975. Once again, his number is 602-487-3975. Make sure to check that out. And then the local realtor we got out here, Howard Chang. Howard Chang is a local realtor with the Serene team at eXp Realty. Their team has an office right here in Culver City, though they help clients buy and sell homes all over the LA County and the surrounding areas. Howard and his team do a ton of business and are super in tune with the market, knowing winning strategies to give their clients a competitive advantage. Have amazing vendor referrals, are a one-stop shop for anything real estate, and just provide a ton of value for their clients. Howard and his partner, Kyle Draper, are UCLA alums and a huge fans of the UCLA football and basketball programs. You will often see them at games, tailgating and networking, and staying involved with the UCLA alumni community. They would love to help any fellow alumni with accomplishing their real estate goals. So if you guys have any real estate needs in the LA area, look no further. Howard is your guy. All right, guys, we're going to go into the episode. What is up, and welcome to the latest edition of the Bruin Bible. This is going to be a very fun one. We actually got out to the Saturday open practice yesterday for UCLA football. A lot of takeaways, a lot of fun, insights, a lot of fun developments within the team. And I got to do it with my brother to my right, Mr. Madman. How are we doing? It's a Sunday. Team USA takes the gold in basketball. Bro, I went immediately from practice to watch with a big group of people. And as a Steph Curry lover, that was like one of the best moments of my sports fandom. It was unbelievable.
No doubt, brother. I was watching it with my dad, and what a special day yesterday was. I had a lot of messages going back and forth with a lot of Bay Area friends as well who are huge Steph fans. And my goodness, I mean, we were just talking off air. Will, it's one of the iconic moments in USA basketball history, no question about it. And for Steph to author it, I thought it was just so fitting. This was his first and only Olympics. It was the one thing that he sort of wanted to complete the trophy cabinet with. And for him to, be the seminal figure of this team. Anthony Edwards had a lot of fun with it too, where he said, Steph only showed up to Paris 3 days ago, but thank God he was here. It was so amazing. All we'll ever remember 10 years from now, 20 years from now, was that final flurry there in that gold medal game, those 4 straight threes, and that last one, the step back, was absolutely insane. And all the big shots. I mean, that's also very telling, Will. When you talk about the alpha, right? There's a concept there. And if you recall, even on that NBA 75, when Jordan walked in, it was just sort of different, right? It was the alpha, when you're on these all-star teams and you're on these Olympic teams, and everyone has their moments to shine when you're up big. But when you need a basket, when it's very tense, I mean, that '08 Redeem team, in the end, it was Kobe was the alpha. And here, in the end, Steph was the alpha. And so, those are the moments where even greatness separates, right? Where it's in a sea of greatness, who separates above the rest. So that will always be an iconic moment. Very, very special. And hey, the appetizer thriller was a great UCLA practice. So fired up to talk about it with you as always, my brother.
Yeah. And, we had a lot of great moments we witnessed from the parking lot and things that excited us. There's a lot to be excited about. I came away feeling more confident that this team can reach their ceiling of 7 to 8 wins next year. And I want to really dive into it, man. We had kind of separate lists. I didn't even know we did this in real time. It is the top 5 things we learned from UCLA football practice. Madman's writing an article on this, so make sure to check it out on LA Football Network, the best place to get your LA football content. But I'll start it off with us, man. I think it's a great way to kind of dive right into it. You and I both had this as one of our main takeaways. The difference between the offensive line in spring to where it's at today, I don't know. We've covered UCLA for 4 years now. We've gone to a lot of spring practices, fall practices, whatever it may be. This is the biggest jump I've ever seen a position group take from a spring to a fall portion. And you look at the transfers they added, Unige in the starting lineup, looks like a legitimate NFL prospect at the tackle position. You get Alani Makaheli, looks like a, run blocker, like a road grader out there on the right guard. And just the added weight. I mean, these guys looked like a Big Ten offensive line. I want to give a massive shout out to Juan Castillo and, the strength and conditioning coach, Keith Belton, because my goodness, this group, Garrett DeGiorgio looked like he packed on 20 to 30 pounds. Like, this was not a small jump for these guys in the group. Josh Carlin was, as it stands today, the presumptive center for UCLA. And I thought they looked really good in practice. I thought they looked cohesive as a unit. We knew Castillo was a hot coaching name coming in here with the offensive line, given his history in the NFL with the Eagles. But my God, the jump they made, I was so astounded and impressed. What were your thoughts on the O-line as we had a front row seat for it from our seats?
No question about it, Will. You said it so well. We walked away, as you recall, from the spring really concerned because there was holes on that line. Obviously, it wasn't complete. Not all of the personnel wasn't there, but you walked away saying, my goodness, how are they going to compete in the Big Ten? They look really small. They look really skinny. And, there was a concern about just kind of being able to field 5. This was sort of a completely transformed unit to your point. I love this 5, to your point here. Unige, Makaheli, Carlin, Holstige, DeGiorgio. Those 5. DeGiorgio, to your point, Will, looks like he's gained a lot of weight in a positive way. I think his sort of center of gravity is even sort of more balanced to the core. Unige looks like the real deal. And, we had him on the show earlier in the spring, and he talked about how, some of his earlier years in Houston, he was ready to make the NFL jump. And so, that he's already kind of thinking NFL because that's where his mindset has been the last few years. And he certainly looks the part. And I think Carlin, the combination of his body, but his mind to be at that center spot, I think is going to be absolutely critical. And that Carlin-Garbers exchange with 2 real veterans, I think is going to be really seamless. And then you've got those guys kind of plugged in there with Holstige and then Makaheli, that are going to really be really strong in terms of the run game. So I'm wildly impressed with what I saw, Will. That's definitely one of the key takeaways. This is a very credible Big Ten offensive line now. I think the only concern that you would have is 6, 7, and 8. There's still, I think, depth is an issue where I think there is going to be kind of a drop off if 1 or 2 guys get hurt. So fingers crossed that they stay healthy and relatively healthy over the course of the season, because if the vast majority of snaps can be done by these 5 individuals, UCLA's in great shape. Garbers is going to have all the time that he needs to do what he does. And he's also made a significant jump that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. So huge shout out to Juan Castillo. The offensive line went from a position of weakness, Will, to I think at this point, a position of strength when you look at the overall roster in just 3 or 4 months.
And to be honestly, man, I think even the additions of Akin-Shiloh and Carmody, from Iowa State and Notre Dame respectively,
will help.
To be honest, I'm not worried about any of the guys. I think that's a very strong 7 right there. The only position I get worried about is the center spot.
Right.
If something were to happen, to a guy like Josh Carlin. But Carmody, when you go for jobs in the real world, the real life, you want people that come from accredited institutions, accredited places, high degrees. Him studying at Notre Dame, the offensive line position, is like coming from one of the highest Ivy League institutions.
Sure.
I know what this guy is going to be. Maybe he's not going to be the superstar player like some of his classmates were at Notre Dame, but this guy is as highly trained as you can be when it comes to that. So when his time comes, I'm confident in it. Akin Shiloh as a interior guard, and I know he hasn't seen a lot of time, but you looked at the body of him on the sideline. With a Juan Castillo development of this guy could be one of the best run blockers in the Big Ten if he can reach his ceiling. I mean that. As somebody that has watched the sport, you and I really study the offensive line group. Akin Shiloh can be something special. But if that center position goes awry, the whole thing can crumble. It'll be like a house of cards, if you will, when it comes down to that. So the offensive line, dude, I mean, from where we were at, I think UCLA fans have got to be ecstatic.
No question, Will. No question. I mean, it's huge. And Akin Shiloh, that's a great point, Will. I think he's a little bit of a project right now. He's raw, but he's got all the tools. And with Carmody, I think there's a mind element there. I'd like to see Carmody put on a little bit of weight, though. I think when you and I were watching, we were like, he's a little smaller in person than maybe we thought. So I think with Castillo's greatness and his teaching ability, do we go from, really comfortable 5 deep to that 7 deep, to your point? But my God, I mean, where have we been and where are we now, Will? So huge turnaround.
Jumping like the long jumpers of the Olympics right
now.
No doubt. Special. The number 2 point I've got for you, the quarterback room as it stands right now. I mean, no question about it. Ethan Garbers looks good. And I am really excited to talk about where we think his ceiling is now with a credible offensive line. But the quarterback room, we got to see a lot of new faces in there to complement the faces we saw in spring. So first time seeing Demarcus Davis, you have you read what they are height and size-wise when you get the pamphlet, the program, you look up what's coming in. Demarcus Davis is every bit of 6'5", 225, 230. He looks like a beast. Formerly recruited to Washington as a 4-star guy, committed, was already enrolled when Kalen DeBoer actually made the decision to go to Alabama. He was in a tough situation, transfers back to Southern California. I think this guy has the potential to get the car keys in a year. I really liked what I saw from him in that limited sample size that we did see. Henry Hasselbeck made some nice plays in the red zone when it came down to it. The lineage of your Matt and Tim Hasselbeck, former NFL quarterbacks. First time we got to see Carson Gordon and what he can bring as kind of a dual threat quarterback. Some very positives on what he can bring to the offense. I mean, and our guy Luke Duncan, I mean, he was still slicing and dicing in the red zone. It was kind of like these practice players link up with one specific guy, and Duncan and Pagan kind of have that thing going on when they get on the field together. So this quarterback room's already deep. And then you got Madden, Iamalavia coming in next year, the 4-star. Right. This room is going to be insane when it comes to QB1 next year and who's going to be battling out for QB2 this particular season. Talk to me about the quarterback room, because I am astounded about how many arms we have back there.
No, Will, I mean, the potential is sort of through the roof. And when we think about this time next year in 2025 spring, to your point, I mean, how it'll be with Davis, Duncan, and Iamalavia, I think that is going to turn into some incredible 3-horse race here. I will say that as it stands right now, the gap between Garbers and QB2 is so vast. I mean, I think it goes without saying that Garbers is QB1. It was interesting, Will, the last portion of practice was 40 minutes of 11 on 11. It was 2 20-minute segments, and each play they sort of did a unique kind of scoring system. It was like 1 to 3 points you got on each play, depending on who won the play between offense and defense and by kind of how much. And it was fascinating when Garbers was in the lineup with sort of the wide receiver ones, the offense ended up taking like a 8, 10, 12-point lead. And again, that's a huge lead when you're scoring every play like 1 to 3 points, right? And then they started going to the 2s and they started going to the 3s. And then ultimately at the end of the 40 minutes, Will, the defense won the overall game 52-51, so it was really significant to see just the mastery and command of Garbers right now. Davis, the size, the body, the 6'5", there's a really smooth touch there. Luke Duncan, we've talked about it, just his ability to sort of stay on platform and just that release. I mean, it's like an instructional video, Will. And then Hasselbeck sort of has the moxie of like his dad and uncle. You can tell, he's sort of getting it into guys, heads as well. He's getting into the jerseys of his receivers, telling them to move around, directing traffic. So you can see there's a ton of leadership there. So a lot to be excited for. Hopefully they continue to progress. These are all great reps for them. All of this experience, all of this exposure. But it's going to be, I think, we're looking at the most compelling quarterback competition next year that UCLA has had probably since the early 90s, when it was when like Wayne Cook was battling with Tommy Maddox, and it was just such an interesting battle in the early 90s. I don't think we've quite had a compelling quarterback competition since then. I think next year is setting up for all of that. So really excited about the future of the QB room for sure. But it's very clear right now that Garbers is sort of head and shoulders above the rest, but which is exactly where you want to be. You want to have your 2024 quarterback be head and shoulders above the rest, and then you want to have sort of a quintet of really exciting prospects for 2025 and beyond.
One caveat to that, I think last year's quarterback battle between Garbers and Moore was very, very compelling. I will say that.
It didn't end well. So right. Yeah,
it didn't end well, but like that was very compelling stuff. It's gonna even be more compelling.
Yeah. It was compelling. Yeah, I think there will be. It was totally compelling. You're 100% right. But there was also, you could feel there was like an element of like off the field, considerations as well, right? I mean, there was so much conversation around Dante's NIL, the pressure to bring him on right away. So it was compelling, no question about it. But, it felt like there was stuff going on behind the scenes. I think next year is just going to be like, let's roll the balls out and who's the best, and I think there's going to be a purity to next year that I think is going to be really fun.
Yeah, man, it's going to be a blast. I am so excited to be able to watch that with you and kind of report our findings and facts of that quarterback battle. Here's the third one I got for you, man. We said this last year, and I'm going to double down as this year is going to exceed last year's group. This is the deepest wide receiver group I've ever seen as somebody that's covered UCLA. Maybe this might be the deepest group ever. You look at the group that they have currently constructed right now, and as crazy as it is, I mean, you got J. Mike as kind of the X, Rico as your 2, Titus as the 3. There's a scenario where leading pass catcher last year, Logan Loya, maybe the 4th man in this unit in an Eric Bieniemy style offense. And Logan Loya, this is no shade to Loya. He is an absolute stud. He's playing kind of every different position. He's not just specifically the slot. But all these guys are out there making significant plays on the offensive end. Quasi Gilmore made the play of practice with the one-hand snag in the end zone on a fade route from our guy Ethan Garbers. Braden Pagan just doing what Pagan does, just making routine big-time catches in practice. This group is about 6-7 deep. Xavier Staples, clearly a benefit of the Keith Belton strength and conditioning offseason program. He looks like he packed on about 10 to 15 pounds. And he's like the 7th, 8th man out there. This group is incredibly deep. And I want to pin this question to you as well. I think with what I saw from the offensive line, that was our only question. I think this is legitimately a top 3 to 4 passing attack within the Big Ten next year. I'm sold. I've seen what I need to see. This group is legit and completely underrated. What did you think about the wide receiver group? And what do you think about that statement of UCLA being a top 4 passing attack in the Big Ten?
Well, I'll answer your second question first. I completely agree. I mean, and I'll build upon that and say you're 100% right. Top 3 to 4 Big Ten passing offense. I think this is going to be a top 5 Big Ten total offense. With what we're getting from the offensive line, and obviously the 1-2 punch there with Harden and Jones, and then what's behind them. This is a top 5 Big Ten offense overall, no question about it. I think what we saw last year offensively and what we're going to see this year offensively, you're on 2 different solar systems. I mean, it's really remarkable. Will, the deep question, the philosophical question, the Rodan stinker question that you've sort of touched upon is who's the top 3 receivers? And yesterday, I mean, the deepest chemistry, the deepest connection, the deepest intuition that Garbers has with any one player is Titus. Yeah. I mean, it was clear that Titus is his guy, and I know you talked about how Garbers really lit up when talking about Titus at Big Ten Media Day. And it's really remarkable. It is evident that Titus is his favorite receiver. And then obviously the elements that J. Mike brings to the table in terms of his ability to sort of get open deep. But then J-Mike also did a phenomenal job yesterday, Will, catching some balls over the middle and being physical. I mean, it was sort of remarkable what he was able to do. And then Flores just finds a way to get open no matter what. He's just so twitchy. He's so good with the hips. His route tree, I think, is the most complex. And then obviously we saw this was tight end, but Monteval in the red zone with Garbers, there was also a tremendous connection. Will, I was sort of tracking it, not, play by play, but just sort of mentally. 90+ percent of Garbers' balls yesterday went to either Titus, Sturdivant, Flores, or Monteval. I can't recall more than one catch that Loya made yesterday, which is staggering. I mean, it's unbelievable that we're looking at a scenario here where the leading receiver of last season primarily was lining up with the twos yesterday, Will. It was unbelievable. And so, to your point, I mean, look how deep this room is. The leading receiver of last year is lining up with the twos. And then you got Quasi Gilmer coming, accelerating deeply. I mean, everyone's sort of talking about him being sort of Freddie Mitchell 2.0, the 2020s version of Freddie Mitchell. It's all there in terms of the dynamism, the hands, the catch radius, everything. And then Pagan, Will, he's like the Los Angeles Chargers of spring and fall practice. Like, Pagan wins every offseason, and you're like ready for the 50 catch, 8 touchdown season. So hopefully he can stay healthy because he is just so talented. But you're talking about those guys as potentially being the next 3, Will. And if those are your next 3, I mean, my goodness, it's absolutely unbelievable. There's been years at UCLA where the first 3 were not as good as this next 3. And we've had a number of years that way. So this is absolutely, a breath of fresh air here. But I think, Will, I was skeptical going into practice yesterday about, how, a lot of talk about Titus and, kind of moving into that top 3. I was sold based on what I saw yesterday between the chemistry of Garbers and Titus, Will. It's Titus, J-Mike, and Flores are the top 3 guys. It's unbelievable. And I think Bieniemy's offense is so complex and he peppers it around so much that Loya's going to get his touches. But my God, what a transformation that is. And the combination of those 6 guys with just the command of Garbers, he looked really good, particularly in the red zone, Will. I mean, there were some zipped balls to Monteval, some balls to the pylon, to your point, to Gilmer, even to Pagan. Obviously, Flores was kind of a guy, on the outside. We talked about the connection with Titus. The command that Garbers has of this offense is very noticeable. This is a top 5 unit, a lot to be excited about here in Westwood going into the season.
Yeah, and shout out to our buddy Steve Waters. We saw him at practice yesterday. He was the first guy that said, watch out for Quasi. This guy looks like some Freddie Mitchell stuff. So got to give credit where it's due there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just a unit. I mean, and imagine this receiving group. And I know eventually he didn't reach his ceiling in the NFL, but can you imagine Josh Rosen with this receiving group at UCLA with Bieniemy calling the plays? I mean, the guy would likely have been the first pick in the draft, like the way this is sourcing out right now. Unbelievable. Garbers is so underrated with the power he can throw it in the zip. He's very just, there's never rarely a duck. It's always just a fire, hits it in the hole, nails it down the field. So I love what we're seeing from Ethan Garbers here. And there's a lot to be expected about that. Stat came out when he played over 30 snaps last year, 5-1, won the bowl game, won the UCLA matchup against USC. Lots of great stuff going on with that. So here's the 4th one I got for you. The most underrated pickup UCLA had in the transfer portal. Give me Bryce Pierre, man. We had a immediate need for that tight end unit. Hudson Habermill out for the year. We're panicked. Habermill was, just such an emotional leader in the locker room, was trying to make plays, had a breakout year. Pierre comes in. He looks every bit of 6'5", 255 pounds. Nimble for that size. Can get in and out of his breaks. He's the more pure receiving threat than I feel Monteval is. And there's going to be a lot of packages where I think Bryce Pierre can really excel in this offense. I'm in on Bryce Pierre. What were your thoughts initially for the former Arizona State transfer?
Yeah, Will, I mean, it's remarkable because he's such a versatile player, right? I mean, and you're talking about a really big tight end, but very nimble. I mean, we were joking. I mean, he's the one who quarterbacked Arizona State's victory over UCLA last year in the Rose Bowl. I mean, and so I think Pierre coming in, I think is going to be just a tremendous, you're going to be able to balance the field as well. I mean, think about kind of some two tight end sets, right? With Pierre and Mataval, and both of those guys, given the targets they are, given the feet that they have, you can do a lot of things in terms of straining both sides of the field, crossing routes. I mean, really sort of creating a lot of open space with, play action, bootlegs, and really being able to do that. So really excited from, I think, the frame of Pierre. So, Will, I think they're still trying to figure out where he's going to play exactly and how he's going to play. He didn't do a ton in the 11 on 11 for 40 minutes. We didn't see a ton of him. But I think it's one of those chess pieces that Eric Bieniemy has that he's trying to figure out how to incorporate, because we got Pierre a little bit later in the cycle of the offseason. I think he's kind of that Swiss Army knife chess piece that I think Bieniemy's figuring out, how do I do this? Because to your point, Will, Pierre kind of has all of those athletic tools and the skill set. We're not comparing, but, it's very much a Travis Kelce-esque type of skill set in terms of just all the different tools and the versatility that he has. So I'm sure that Bieniemy is thinking through how best to use him and in what sets. Is Mataval kind of the ideal when you're going trips on one side with, kind of your big three? Do you bring in Pierre with that next three that we're talking about? Do you go, do you bring Pierre more in kind of two tight end actions? Do you do a little bit of everything? I think there's a lot to be said there. And look, hey, all else fails, Will, with Pierre, he might even be QB2, I mean, the way he played last year, in the Rose Bowl. But I think that's a lovely sleeper pick, Will. I completely agree with it. He's got a tremendous skill set. I'm excited. I think Hawaii and Indiana, those first two games, how he plays Pierre, where he sort of lines up, I think is going to be key, because I think he's going to need more of him in some of these bigger games later in the season. So it'll be interesting to see where Bieniemy goes from where he was yesterday, where he's still kind of in the lab, in the shop, trying to figure it out, to then kind of having a defined set of plays, defined packages, and a defined role for Pierre. I love the pick.
Yeah, and I think just for me personally, like, when you lose a player the caliber of Hudson Habermill and you really don't have a backup, I think Jack Peterson, very talented player. I look at him more as an H-back as opposed to a tight end. You had to replace that guy, and just what I saw from Pierre, and like you said, not targeted as much as we wanted. He did make a catch at 11 on 11 before I left, but just even in that one flash instance, I go, okay, we have a legitimate guy that can back up what we have. We're not losing a step in any facet. I thought that was such an underrated pickup in an important position group in a Bieniemy offense. So really liked our guy Bryce Pierre there. The last point that I have, defense, I'm feeling very confident about, man. I think, the safety group, Brian Addison was running stride for stride with a lot of these receivers. Huge safety, 6'4". These Oregon guys are telling me he's really good if he's healthy. Ramon Henderson, the other strong safety back there from Notre Dame, his resume speaks to itself. The linebacking group, great. I love, having John Vaughn's back. If we get anything out of Ollie Cahow as we're expected to, that's a win for a group that has Kane Madrano and Olufemi Oladejo in there. Just a loaded group. The only area of concern, I think we talked about it yesterday, was the edge rushing position. Toia and Keanu Williams, they have a shot to be a top 3 to 4 unit on the interior of the defensive line within the Big Ten next year. But if you break down the edge rushers from yesterday, and, it just, as it stands right now on ourlads.com, this is the depth chart website, you got Drew Tuizama and Sheriff Seye kind of as the starters at the edge rushing position, both transfers, one from South Carolina, one from Florida Atlantic. I didn't see a lot of those guys yesterday. You look at some of the other dudes, Jacob Busic might be our number one edge rusher. Not ideal, I think, for a defense. I think he's a talented player, but the ceiling on him, I think, is very limited. If you can just get a little bit more pressure in the edge rushing, because you're going to need that in some of these Big Ten games on third down, you got to get a stop. You need that pressure. Who's going to step up and do that? Talk to me about your impressions of the edge rushing group, because to me, I think that's the only position group I'm feeling a little bit, uncertain about when it comes to UCLA football next year.
Yeah, Will, I think it's an excellent point. It's probably the only group right now. I think everything else is sort of an A or a B in terms of if we had to grade out every position group. I think edge right now is the only group where you'd have to say C or below. And so just given, depth, quality, so on and so forth. I think there's a very interesting interplay, though. And this was sort of one of my points, Will, in the article. I think there's a very fascinating interplay between the edge as well as the interior, as well as the linebackers. I think there's sort of a holistic front seven element that's going on here. Number one, I think to your point on the interior, Toia and Keanu are those stalwarts. I mean, both those guys are 300 plus right now. I think Toia, around 325, Keanu 310. I mean, you're seeing really strong girth there. And then I think, Will, our instincts were right because Collins Acheampong was actually being played on the interior yesterday. So we were sort of expecting to see him be the edge heir apparent, the freak athlete, the 6'7", 280, 6'7", 285. The vast majority of the 40-minute 11-on-11, Acheampong was actually on the interior. So that was interesting that he's not lining up on the edge here. And it's almost looking like kind of a three-person rotation on that interior between Toia, Keanu, and Collins Acheampong. What I thought the other interesting wrinkle, so a guy that we thought was going to be on the outside is actually on the inside. And now a guy that we thought was perhaps not even an edge rusher is now going to be an edge rusher potentially. Where I think the wrinkle was, we saw a lot of Kane Medrano at edge yesterday. And so I think there's going to be kind of an interesting role here, Will, to your point. I think Medrano is being looked at very seriously in this hybrid linebacker edge type of role. But I think Medrano, assuming you have a healthy Ali Kehoe, fingers crossed, we've been waiting for it for a couple of years. And then to your point, John Vaughns being kind of more of that hybrid sort of safety linebacker, Derwin James-esque player. If you go with Femi, you go with Kehoe, and you go with John as sort of your three linebacking rotation, and, you're sort of, whether you got two backers or you got three on different packages, that becomes your linebacking crew. And now Kane becomes that edge, and now they're slotting a Acheampong over to the interior. I think that's how we're sort of playing it, because I think, to your point, Will, I think right now both sides of the edge there's some significant questions. So I think the question, the item to address is, let's bring Medrano to the edge. And look, let's be honest, his body type, the way he's so slender, the way he goes kind of sideline to sideline, he's kind of more of an edge than he is really a true backer, to be very honest, just in terms of body. And then now you can kind of go edge by committee on that weak side. And if any one of these three or four guys kind of emerges, now you're kind of solid. So I think it's very interesting how the edge is sort of impacting the overall dynamics of the front seven. I think in a positive way, but I think Kane now, we've sort of thought of him so much as it's Oladipo and Kane as kind of the two returning stalwarts. I think that model is now breaking. I think Kane is coming to the edge, and now it's going to be Oladipo, John, and Ali Kehoe at linebacker. So that was a really fascinating wrinkle to see, Will, to your point.
Yeah, and I just think, it's so tough to replace a guy like Latu. I mean, the first defensive player picked in the NFL draft, what he meant to this defense. But the depth was, frightening, I think, in a lot of regards coming out of spring. Similar to what the offensive line was. They are experimenting bringing Oladipo and Kane off the edge, which I think will be very helpful for UCLA moving forward. But if they can just have some semblance of a pass attack, if they can get 50% of what that pass rush was last year, I think that's a home run for what this team can be defensively. Any other points that stood out to you within the practice realm that we may have missed, man? Because that's my five. I'm interested to hear some that you may have.
Thriller. I had a sort of a different version of the five. We hit a few, particularly with kind of the front seven, with the receiving room as well, with sort of Loya. The last point I'll leave with, Will, and I think it's positive, is that if we think of Deshaun Foster as the CEO of the program, I think Eric Bieniemy is the COO. In terms of kind of the day-to-day play-over-play, I think, again, we saw sort of some semblances of this in the spring, Will, but I think it sort of was reiterated yesterday. When you talk about kind of the 11-on-11 command, who was kind of the loudest voice, who was the one who was sort of looking at things play-over-play, who was sort of the biggest influence on 11-on-11, it was Eric Bieniemy. I mean, from an organizational behavior standpoint, if you looked outside, you said, wow, he's really kind of orchestrating this offense-defense exchange right now, which I think is really positive because I think it allows Deshaun to be more of a rover. We saw him kind of rover around practice, go to the different units, even talk to recruits, talk to donors, really be that CEO. And I think the dynamic between Foster and Bieniemy is a really strong one. Bieniemy being able to be that X's and O's guy, play over play, down over down, scheme over scheme, really in that chief operating officer role, I think is going to allow Deshaun Foster to sort of grow into his role. I mean, we have to remember this is still someone who was a running backs coach last year and now is the head person. So it's going to take a little while for Deshaun to sort of grow into the entirety of that role. And I think that dynamic is very strong for UCLA moving forward as Deshaun grows more and gets his voice, his imprint on the program and the style of play. I think being able to lean on Eric Bieniemy's experience, his pedigree to do things kind of play over play, I thought was a really powerful dynamic and one that I think Bieniemy really enjoyed. And I think Deshaun was also very gracious and strategic in allowing Bieniemy to sort of do that while he focused on all of the other things. So I think going into the season, it's also going to be really interesting to see how that relationship flourishes over the course of a 12-game season, how it flourishes over even the course of a single four-quarter game, and how that dynamic grows. Because I think the Foster-Bieniemy dynamic, I think is going to be really critical to the success of this team moving forward. Juan Castillo is kind of doing his thing. The defense is kind of doing their thing. But that dynamic in particular, I think is going to be critical to UCLA's success. And I think their relationship is very, very strong to start. So fingers crossed that stays, that's enhanced. But again, Will, I walk away. I felt always this was sort of a 7-5 team going into this season. I think it's going to be 7-5, 8-4. And I actually think there's going to be a lot of 40 to 37 games, where who's going to have the ball last, because I think we're going to score a ton. And I think I'm still a little bit concerned with our ability to set the edge. And if you can't set the edge, you're always going to be a little bit off balance. So I think a lot of points are going to be given up. A lot of points are going to be scored. This is going to be a wildly entertaining team and a wildly entertaining season. Can't wait for it.
I can't wait as well, man. Madman in the building. We're going to have a lot more stuff coming your guys' way. We are a mere couple weeks away from college football coming back in our living room. Hawaii cannot come soon enough. You guys have a great rest of your day. We will be back here very, very soon. Don't go anywhere. Bruin Bible, we are out.